Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call the probation officers and 911 telecommunicators pension plan board group to order. Thank you all for being here. I think we're going to skip introductions because we've met and we have a lot of work to do today and in the next few meetings. And so I want to make sure that we're maximizing the use of our time. I don't expect that we're going to get through the entire agenda today, but this is really the bulk of the work that we need to complete as we work toward meeting the statutory requirement that, or the session law requirement that was established by the legislature. And so we're just gonna, I think, try and keep making as much progress through this list as we can. And I would propose, just for purposes of not getting stuck, that if we realize that we're not reaching consensus on something, that we have staff set it aside and we can let stakeholders go back and think about where there might be some areas of compromise, with the hope that at the end of the day, on the issues that we need to address with our report, we have consensus with the group. I prefer to not do voting on every issue if we can avoid that, but if it comes to it, we can have that discussion about how we proceed if there is not consensus among the group. So with that, the first item is something that some of the stakeholders behind the scenes have been talking about a little bit, with trying to really answer some of the difficult questions that will need to be answered in order to understand how much some of these ideas will cost. And so without having this discussion, I think it probably would be very productive to move on to some of the other things, like the second item, which is the definition, and then subsequent items after that. So with that, some of these questions were developed with help from PERA, and I would just say that I think the reason for that is they need this information in order to understand how to quantify some of the decisions that are made. And so, Doug, would you like to take a few minutes to just walk through what those questions are, and then we can maybe start with the first one?
Sure. Yeah, and then thanks for that introduction. One thing that the PERA board did approve doing and was done was the cost study. And with that cost study, we needed to have clear direction where to start. And that was the baseline of the study, but there's also kind of reserve that there would be one alternative that we can go back to the actuary and say, can you study this other alternative? So the baseline for that study was determined by a group of stakeholders 6 months ago, 10 months ago or so. And it was the baseline, again, this was not a PERA board approved suggestion. It was just a suggestion of the script where to start. But the key features of that was unreduced benefits at age 60, 2.2% multiplier, and the same formula is used for the correctional, PERA correctional plan, which is annual adjustment equal to 100% of inflation, minimum 1%, a cap of 2.5%. And then there were two scenarios for disability benefits. One is that it's valued more with the like the provisions applicable to the general plan, and one where it's provisions applicable to the police and fire plan. What was not included in the cost study was past service. That wasn't in there. So there's that option if this wants to see another scenario to look at something different than that. So people can kind of keep that in mind here. And then, as Ann said, when you're talking about looking at all the different unique benefit provisions, what age for unreduced benefit, reduction factors for early retirement, disability factors, the multiplier, the post-term increase, all those things in past service. How do you do that if you don't have a good sense of the cost? The initial cost estimate that was done even questions about how do you interpret that? Because it doesn't just say this is the cost of this plan. What we heard from the actuary is the cost is going to change over time. How you compare that to the general plan, which has a cost that changes over time. You know, we're seeing a range, really, the difference is a range of costs that range from 4 to 8%. So the idea here is, without really knowing what different groups are willing to pay or what they're expecting to pay, that makes it kind of hard to start talking about the details. When you have a menu of options that's very broad and a very wide range of costs to those options. So these are just suggested questions to be asking the employee groups, you know, what their groups are willing to contribute or think is reasonable to contribute. Asking the employee groups what they're expecting from the employers. Similarly, from the employers, there's a question of what they expect to pay, what they expect from the employees. And separate from that is what's expected from the legislature. So desired order here. I mean, the order doesn't matter, but the first question would be each group is, you know, what they're expecting from their stakeholder group to contribute, and what that stakeholder group is expecting from others to contribute.
Let's start then. Thank you, Doug. Let's start with the first one, which is how much are employees willing to contribute? Essentially, based on what percentage of if the employee groups that had any discussions about that and are ready to put a number out there or range.
I guess I could go first. Honestly, we're kind of at a loss, and the reason is because we brought a plan to the legislature where we paid for everything. And that was inequitable. So coming up with a number of we're willing to pay this is difficult when we don't know what is the employer. It's a tough question. So looking at where we were to where we are, it's a span of, we want to come up with a plan that allows for early retirement as directed, but we've already said with our old plan, we were willing to pay for the whole thing. Now, obviously, that's off the table because that's inequitable that Para had said that. So with that being off the table, we need more information to figure out where we're at.
Just, and Doug, you can help me out. Para didn't say it was in. Para said it's intergenerational.
I'm sorry, yes.
Fair,
Yes.
which I think are two different things, because you can fund. I mean, theoretically, you could fund it so it was paid for by the people who were benefiting. And so I think the Para objection was not that the employees were willing to pay for it, but that there was a significant shift to the newer employees to pay for the benefits for the older employees.
And that was my understanding too, never once, and this is a good discussion to have early because people had a different understanding. Not once did I remember a legislator saying we're not passing this plan because it's inequitable among the contributions. It was intergenerational equity. There were questions about past service. There was questions about total costs in my mind, but I don't remember Para or the legislature saying we're not passing this because employees has offered to pay everything and employers aren't paying enough.
Right, and I'm sorry, I may not have been clear about that. I meant what you are saying is that was the issue that Para had, and that was the issue that the Legislative Pension Committee had. And that was a hard stop. And so we kind of feel like we put a number out there a long time ago, and that wasn't acceptable. So how do we come up with another number? Would I like to see the employer increase contribution 100%? We want a plan.
I think I would, or sorry, I mean,
Go ahead, Jim.
yeah. One other feedback that I do remember from that process was also that there was the feedback that it would not be typical or maybe recommended for that employer balance to be shifted, that there's typically a difference there with the employer contributing more. I definitely remember that feedback kind of being delivered to us in the past.
We also struggle with the reasonable order. We've never, I mean, like Nicole said, we came in and said we pay for all of it. So now when we double back, we're not sure what reasonable is. I don't know what percentage is reasonable in terms of what's been done in the past.
Should we start with the actuary study? The actuary study for the age of 60, 2.2 multiplier, the 1 to 2.5 COI. That it had a number, 14% or something like that had to be in there. So if we take that number, if that's what we're trying to achieve, we got that number from them. So then can look at it and say, okay, what is the employee willing to contribute? What is the employer willing to contribute to get that number? If we feel that number is too high, well, then do we look at lowering the multiplier or whatever till we get to a percentage that we think we can get to from employer employee, and then we go back to the actuary with that set of numbers to see if it meets the need. So that's my thought on it. I mean, the actuary threw out a number. Can we get to that number? Yes or no? And percent. Still a number. I see Doug looking it up. I thought it was 14 something.
14.4.
0.44.
It's on page 13 of the GRS presentation. Yeah, page 13.
Page 22 of the GRS presentation. Cost starts at 19.08%.
Right. They have 6.5 to 7.5, and that's 14%. So we're a good 5%.
That's correct. That's the difference today comparing it to actual contributions. We did talk a little bit about how both numbers will change over time. But the cost of the new plan that GRS costed out ran down as people come in. And similarly, not similarly, but for a different reason, the general plan cost is expected to go down when that plan reaches full funding. So it's the 5% difference now. At some point would get bigger and then it flows back down to 5%.
I know what is coordinated is expect to reach that fully funded or 90% in 3 years.
Very close to 10 years.
10 years. Okay. So the employer would still pay that 7.5 for the next 10 years.
They help when it took down control, because it's not when it reaches 100% funding now. I forget the exact percentage. It's down in the same year, which I think is 2034. But yeah.
Right, so it was projected that the plan would be fully funded 2034. and the 1% would go away. Then last year, legislature increased the benefit formula for post-retirement increases, which pushes out the expected full funding date. But to keep the employers from having that extra 1%, we changed the threshold, so it turns off when the plan is 98% funded. So kind of keeps that 2034. So 2034 is the expected.
When
They just expected. If all assumptions are right. That was that.
The employee groups, DARS, I like how DARS approaching it. If we're basing it, not that this will be ironclad with a set of benefits or something like that will be, but based on that 19%. And if the employer rate stayed at 7.5, we're close to 12% or an 11.5% roughly employee contribution, which is higher by 4% than what you're paying right now. Is that in line? Is that too much in that breakdown? Is that acceptable? It comes close to what the numbers were in your plan at the legislature, from what I remember. Just starting there.
Just wanted to point out that the MSRS folks are starting at a different point. So employee contributions are 6% and employer 6. So
It's in what?
6.25, 6.25%.
The employee?
The employee is 6 and the employer is 6.25. So it's a different starting.
Madam Chair, I have a question. That's a great point, Aaron. The actuary study was done in Paragon. What does it look like for MSRS? Would it be identical?
It wouldn't be identical, no. I mean, it would be similar. So what would happen is whatever the subscription size, we would have to go back and ask our expert to determine the additional cost. Plus that in the law.
We would have no idea if it's gonna come out to be 19% higher or lower than that.
There's different demographics.
I can say, it sounds like probation, you did a temperature check of your people and what they would be willing to pay and stuff like that. That really wasn't done on the telecommunicator side. You know, the only thing that was done from the work group that we had a couple of years ago was, you know, is there interest, you know, in getting it done? Which of course that didn't come out with the consensus, but here we are today, but we never did that temperature check. That being said, I don't know how we do that. I think I had conversations with Jim Morton, and I know he's remote today, and Amy gave us a little workshop, which I'm gonna attend another one whenever she's offered it. On Para, what a wealth of information.
Yeah.
But I think we're gonna have to educate, you know, whatever we come up with at the end of the day, we're going to have to explain the why. And particularly that maybe it is gonna start out higher, but once we get the numbers and it's constantly evaluated, it can come down. I know there's interest in getting the age of 60. There is no question there at all. This is what they want. And I would think that they're willing to pay something for that. And, you know, I think there's possibly room in the multiplier and stuff. I definitely want to keep the cost of living, you know, up there. That's important. So those are my initial thoughts. I mean, they're willing to move the number. I don't know that they're willing to take the entire 5%.
Madam Chair.
If I can also clarify that our group, we did not meet with all of our group.
Right.
Because that's impossible, especially in a tight time frame like that. So that our standing of, this was what we brought to the legislature, is just that. It is not a recent check in with, almost 1,600 people.
Is there anyone online that wants to weigh in on this question?
This is Jim Mortensen. I think this is gonna be difficult at best, even get people to understand all of this. Without putting a class on. Can you guys hear me okay?
Hang on, Jim, we can't hear you, so I'll try and get you beamed in here. Give it another try, Jim.
How's that? Is that better?
You have an X on the bar down there, those speakers muted. See where, can you look on the top bar there?
This isn't the screen.
Oh, they're not the same. Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead and
And try one more time, Jim, sorry.
That's okay. Is that better?
I got you. Yep.
Hear you.
Yeah, I think this is gonna be difficult at best to go back to those folks doing these jobs to get a temperature on this, because it's gonna take a whole education class of how this even works. And my feeling on it, we gotta keep the 60-40 split going between the employee and the employer, which is pretty much what all these pension plans are doing right now. And to keep it something similar to what corrections is going with. And I know they've made some improvements to their plan in the last year or two, but at a minimum, to go with what they were running before they made the improvements, at least to get this off the ground. And as we get it moving forward, we can always make those improvements later.
This question could be answered quite easily if the employers said we're willing to pay 5%.
Find out in the next question.
Sure. I mean, where our head was at, and we kind of presented this in late July, during one of the first meetings was, we were looking at the para general rate. I think we expressed an openness before to the higher employee contribution. Employers are facing significant cost pressures right now. At the county level, county property taxes have increased 5 years in a row on a statewide average on a percentile basis. I don't know the data for 2026, but I'd expect it would go up again. And there's also cost shifts that were considered at the state level. Some had, some did not. And the federal bill, which is also increasing cost pressures on counties, especially starting in 2027. So that's where our head was at, certainly, and it's kind of where when I've had conversations with my members, at least, will let Matt speak for himself too, but at least going into this process, that's kind of where we've been at, so.
We just came, Joe and I just presented along with Emilio at our fall policy conference, so that's roughly 200 members of our, 87 county board of commissioners. And I would echo what Nathan said, the levies are going to be higher than they have been for 2 decades. What's driving that is mostly what we're seeing through anecdotal surveying is labor costs already. So it's going to be a push, I feel like, for me to go back, just like Jim said, and I respect what he's saying, it's going to be hard for me to go back to my membership and say, one, to support a new plan, which is still something that divides our membership. We have people who are passionately supportive of the premise of the new plan. We have people who say, no, watch out, that's a clip. Think about all the other groups that are going to come and ask for the same thing. So that's a tough fight within our membership, but I feel like the thing and the tool that I have to go back to them is remember those stories of why folks are doing it, but also the employees came and they're funding their plan. So why are we in that way? And I think it'll be difficult to impossible for me to go back in the context that Nathan mentioned and say we should be paying more than parageneral. I think there's a nuance to the parageneral rate. I will say our employers are excited to get back to 6.5. And as Doug lays out history of employer contributions, we are high. We are high from that history of employer contributions. We'd like to get back. We'd like to have some savings on that front too. There might be some nuance to, do we keep that 7.5 rate for the new plan permanent, which in effect is a 1% more employer contribution rate. That's something that I don't want to speak on behalf of Nathan or Owen, but that's something that I definitely would be willing to bring about to our members, but just being transparent about where we're coming from. It's similar to what Jim said.
Yeah, and yeah, just like on a current policy baseline, like we're currently at 7.5, scheduled to tick down to 6.5. I just haven't talked with my members about like, okay, well, that's kind of like holding constant in one way. So I mean, it's certainly something we can bring up. But yeah.
So one thing too, because I think we're nearing that end of like where we're at contribution wise, the next questions I think are interesting because in my mind, there's savings to be had on that total number. If we look at certain things, as Nicole mentioned, which is the multiplier. Assume we heard last time, I think someone asked the question of why 2.2. Well, that's not statutorily driven. That's for us to decide. Right now, parageneral is at 1.7. How much does a 1.9 or 3.0 save us on that 19.08 rate? How much does vesting, does vesting give us any period of time or give us any money back? And then I know, and I hear the priority of COLA, purchasing power, which I hear, and early retirement. But does 1 year get us a significant amount more? Because if you did a 61, 1.9 vesting from 3 to 5 years, are we looking at now 14% instead of 19, or are we only saving 10? Are we saving 7%? So that would be a question that I think would be interesting to consider for all of us.
I just want to say that I'm a little uncomfortable with the 2.5% COLA. So we at MSRs have fixed COLAs, so they're fixed compounded percentage. So we don't have this between the CPI. And none of our plans have greater than a 1.75. So I would be more comfortable with a 1.75. And then similarly, the multiplier, our correctional plan folks have a 2.2% multiplier, and I understand why you would want to have the same. But it feels uncomfortable to me because they're in the facility with the direct contact for an extended period of time. And I know you all have that too. So I would be more comfortable with a 2 or 2.1 even. It's small. And then our general plan folks are already at prospective 1.9. So I just point that out too. So going to 2 wouldn't be much. 2.2 is a little bit.
I know, I'm sorry if I'm butting in line here, and I just would echo, so the challenge is budgetarily, right? The Department of Corrections has a $45 million, $50 million cut that we are absorbing this year, and we are laying people off at Stillwater Correctional Facility at present. So and obviously SERP is extraordinarily burdensome to our agency. And if you compute what the employer contribution is, 18.85% is what this plan costs us. And, the other part of this is we have many other individuals that have contact with formerly incarcerated, currently incarcerated. And my concern without, the other SERP has a 75% contact with incarcerated without a percentage or any sort of kind of metric there. It feels like, over here it's very prescriptive, and over here it's not, it's kind of like anybody who has proximity and formerly incarcerated, which for me is like everyone. So this is really burdensome for us, and timing is very challenging. So.
Go ahead.
I thought that I read somewhere that the para general went to 1.9. Am I wrong on that? Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Sarah General still.
Okay, I'm sorry, it's Jen. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Kim Jo?
I apologize that I had a conflict, so I came late, so I hope I'm not repeating something somebody already said. So I'm gonna say that out right now, but I had a meeting conflict that was mandatory on the other side. So as Matt said that we just presented, last week, there was enormously strong support from, our public safety county commissioners. There was also some concerns from the governmental group, about what that meant for other employees, those, what would that mean with budgets and the levy? But I also want to point out that, when we were in front of the pension committee last year, one of the legislators specifically expressed concern that if we did not have a contribution, it would not be considered fair. They actually, that was one of, when they went through our proposal, there was a couple things they didn't like about our proposal, and one of them was that they didn't like the idea that it was solely employee funded. They wanted some employer contribution, added contribution. So it's just something that the legislators specifically brought up as being something that they wanted to see something in there.
Yeah.
And I guess I respectfully just remember it being one single representative, Representative Tim Walker's. And I did hear that, that it would be out of line of the current public safety, but that was also, I think that is the one prospect that we have as an employer, but potentially be, like I said, that keeping it at the 7.5%, which is in effect a contribution. And keeping it there, I feel like is the one line that we'd be able to really put our members towards.
So I'm hearing that the employee groups are not necessarily all on the same page with the 11.5%. We may have some questions to resolve with MSRF. And so that may be one that we can't answer yet, or are the folks who are representing those groups comfortable proceeding?
Madam Chair, how do we get to figure out what would these statistics be to get us to 14%? I mean, I don't know if the actuary can do that. I mean, do we have to give them 1.961, or are they smart enough to know that how to figure out 14? I don't know.
Yeah, they can work to a number. I think the most valuable thing to ask the actuary is to look at the different retirement age. Because the multiplier, you can take their results and prorate it based on a different multiplier. That's easy. The COLA, a different COLA formula can be done similarly. An adjustment for that, what's not really intuitive is what if it's a different retirement age? So asking them to come back and say, what does this all look like with an age 61? Would be, I think, more valuable to this group because it gives them more news to work with about segmenting cost.
So, Madam Chair, I think what I heard you say then, is that if we kept at 60, because that's what the study was at, we can easily right now figure out what it could be at 2%, 1.9%, and see where that gets us before we start messing with the age.
Right, you could take this 19% and just prorate it for a different multiplier. And that's going to be pretty accurate for that result.
Would it be reasonable to give Doug some homework to provide to those representing the employees, look at some different runs so that you can come back with something that you want for you?
That's good.
Yeah, I think so. My suggestion would be, based on what I've heard, is ask our actuary to run a scenario at a different age for reduced retirement. And then that gives us the information to be able to use that and then also show different multiplier rates from it.
From probation standpoint, we're not asking for a different age. It was our understanding that that was legislatively, that was the direction was 60. I would like to see the multiplier, how that weighs out before we talk any different ages.
9 months is.
We all agree.
I guess it wasn't said by the legislator that it has to be 60 in the session law. It can be whatever you guys decide. That might be what the sort of told the Pero when they were doing their study as the stakeholders wanted this. But if the legislature hasn't mandated you all to pick 60, whatever. Thank you for that clarification.
The value of the study is it puts prices on the menu options. We'll say this is what has to be done.
Madam Chair, if it's easy to do it, I think that's part of the reason why we're kind of in the woods here. We don't really know what to ask for. The more examples or scenarios, the better. If it's easy to do, the more the better, I think.
You're looking at like, the way I'm hearing that is, can you see different combinations that add up to a certain, to what you'd like to see?
Is that something you can help with, Dr. Amy? Thank you. Jeff?
I appreciate the difficulty of this. I mean, it's now into the number zone, which gets really difficult. And I think I just, from my overview perspective, you know, as a group and having worked on this now for some years, we're trying to solve this for the long term. And there's been a full recognition that the probation officers that, used to have the rule of 90 and for the wear and tear. And again, it's just, if you're doing the job and we respect our colleagues in the facilities, no doubt, a lot of us have worked in facilities before ourselves, but we've all along tried to position ourselves with the approach where we are between what those working in the facilities and police and fire and the general plan. We've really tried to look at positioning ourselves in between, recognizing that tremendous work of our colleagues and recognizing this tremendous work and the wear and tear that the probation officer goes through. And I know the budget times are so brutal right now, but we are trying to get to a point where we're positioned ultimately in between. And we do see, when I look at the overview plan, I think I think the pension commission put this together, but the difference in contribution rates, when I look at the para-correctional, it looks to me like it's a 3.42% difference with the employer having a higher allowance. And the MSRS correctional, 9.25 difference, police and fire 5.9, MSRS state patrol at 14.7. So again, and we're not, all those have the age group of 55. We're asking for this, we're looking at the 60. So we are trying to be positioned in between, recognizing the work that our colleagues do and in the facilities and the police and fire, and recognize it. And I don't know if it's, I guess these are all things everybody knows, but I just want to be able to, we're trying to ultimately end up at a spot in between there, that we think is really fair for the wear and tear and the day probation officer takes. Thank you.
Amy Jo.
I just realized I would also like to just also go back and comment a little bit again on what Paula mentioned about the 75% and what Jim just talked about as well. Probation is just ultimately different than we're not in the facility. We are in the field. And there's going to be some things that are going to be more similar to police and fire and some things that might be more similar to corrections. But as Jim was just saying, we are different than both. And probation is just not going to be able to sit to that same standard of what a facility has. based on how much contact somebody has. Just like I mentioned last time, that a police officer would not be able to have that same standard of contact being in the field. Probation officers are in the field, they're in their offices, they're in courtrooms, their jobs are just ultimately different than somebody in a facility and their contact levels. And it would just be so difficult to be able to manage that as a manager of how much contact somebody was having today versus tomorrow, that's just gonna be such a difficult concept to even bring into this. I understand your difficulty because you have two different types of people you're supervising at DOC, but it's not, they're just not comparable when you have a facility versus somebody in the field. I don't think Paula was saying that she thought that the percentage should be applied. I think she was just trying to point out that there's a very prescriptive process for participating in the correctional plan, and this seems less prescriptive, and so having something a little more detailed might be helpful so that it's more comparable.
And maybe this will come out in the wash as we talk about definitions, right? I mean, for us, it's truly, this is a burden, right? And, you know, it may be when we get down to brass tacks that really we have a 1.9% general plan, right? So MSRS is already there for the folks that are probation correction agents in MSRS, right? We're already at 1.9. So we're already different from the para side of the equation. And so maybe then we're just looking at the earlier retirement piece as being the difference and what it would the cost to fund 5 years early retirement. So maybe the math is different, but you said it's not, but it might be, when I think about it, it might be different math, right?
I mean, it's gonna be.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea, so for us to prospectively shift from 1.7 to 1.9 was about 0.95%. So that was just an example. And to go from 1.5% COLA to 1.75 was 1% pay. So if you look at shifting some of those numbers, that's where you might see some savings.
Well, I'm just gonna pause us here. We did have a suggestion from Jim Mortensen online, who is suggesting maybe we have a subcommittee of the employee groups. Maybe find a time that they can meet with Doug and Amy and Aaron, and then come back to us with something that represents consensus, so that we can get through this question, maybe in the next meeting or not.
David, I'm just wondering if we're just trying to solve the math problem, right? Then maybe we ask Doug, can you figure out what the parameters are that would get us to, I don't know, is the number 14% or whatever that number is? And then Doug can come back with the parameters that say, this is how you get to 14. And we would be like, well, we feel like we're close with retirement age, with multiplier, et cetera, or wow, that is not getting close. That's not just math.
Because to that point, if he came back and said 61 or 62 gets you there, you all as employees might still say, we don't want that. That's fine. I still think that's a fair exercise. You might say the total cost being, instead of 62, maybe it's 61, or we stay at 60, but COLA changes in the COLA, the multiplier, and I'm still interested in that vesting question is something that can pick up enough slack, get up and work. So what I'm saying is that we ask Doug to look at that early, to include the early retirement there. I'm not saying we're going to strong will and say, oh, now it's 61 or 62. Ultimately, this is your plan. You're going to represent the employees on whether or not it's good or we want it. But I think we only get another shot at the actuary apple. I don't know how many, if you get to go back, Doug, from based on what you paid 1 or 2 or 3 more times. But if you only get once, I think we should ask all the questions. So we play around.
So how do the groups want to proceed? I feel like this is a question that some people in the room can't answer. Maybe those who can should be talking to one another and get more information from that. Tammy Jo and then Nicole.
Yeah, well, so Matt brings up a very good point then. If we can only go back to the actuarial one more time, is that all the questions we have?
Right.
I mean, because that makes me go, oh, is there more questions that we should be asking? I mean, should we be like compiling a whole bunch of questions here? And because I like that idea of how do we create a graph that says, okay, if we go this way. Because there is so many different options on the table and there's many different ways that we could make this work. That I think a lot of people would feel comfortable with, especially blending some of those questions. And as long as we don't cut anything off the table, are those all the questions we need to ask though? I mean, is there other questions we're not aware of at this point that we should be asking? And maybe that's that first question for that subcommittee, because I'd hate to all of a sudden go, oh, we didn't think of this, and now we're out of luck.
Nicole, and then I'll make a suggestion.
And that actually was what I was going to say is, one of the questions I have when I look at the new plan is when we went to the legislature, we didn't have earliest retirement at 50, but the actuarial does. And it was at 55. Does that make a difference? I say that as a 55-year-old who doesn't want that to, but we might as well look at it.
Shouldn't, because the early retirement reductions will actually, so it shouldn't.
It would matter. Thank you.
So is there someone here who would like to take the lead with that subcommittee in knowing who needs to be in the room, in the meeting, and then working with MSRS and PERA?
Quick question though, so should we split up between PRA separate from MSRS, or should we do it all together? Is there, do folks want to be the same, or maybe they would come to different conclusions?
You know what? While you're thinking about that, I say, you know, Aaron mentioned some things that MSRs would be comfortable with. Different systems have different priorities with their benefits. And one system might prefer a higher multiplier and a lower COLA. One might go the other way. So we have some differences there too that need to be kept in mind, and that probably needs to at least be incorporated into the menu of options.
We may need 2 volunteers.
I will say maybe just a second point is I think there is a LCPR principle that talks about like people who are in similarly situated jobs should have similarly situated benefits. And so straying too far from that could be a point that does get brought up to the legislature as against one of their principles.
I'll just point out, like for understanding, paracorrectional has that 2.2%, whereas the 2.5%, whereas the MSR's correctional has 1.75. So there are some deviations. Yeah.
And kind of a general question, because as you look across on there are differences. And as a group, is our task to try to make a single correctional plan and 911 items, probation and 911 telecommunicator, or can we live with differences? Because to me, that's like a gate question that creates conflicts with MSRS.
Fair question, because almost are we looking at potentially up to 4 different plans, right? MSRS, probation, MSRS telecommunicator, para, probation, para telecommunicator. That's gonna get a lot. I'm MSRS, so I appreciate all these differences, so.
I mean, I'm just wondering, we can have a lot of discussion about kind of rectifying error and MSRS, when in reality, there's differences amongst plans. So I just want to, unless we think that's, I would.
I think the session law, how it said it was one plan under MSRS, one plan under para with both groups. Separate, they can have differences. That wasn't in the session law that they need to be the same or that they need to be different. I think it's just you know, can be a question for you guys. How similar, how different should they be based on the employees, looking at employees on the other side and what they have.
Amy Jo?
I would, at this point, I would say we probably want to stay as close as we can, and at some point, we may have to have some differences in the end. One of the concerns I have about splitting us too far at this point is actually just looking around this table. I'm not, and I might be wrong, because I don't know everybody's direction, but I don't know how much MSRS probation is actually represented at the table. Because you're not. So we actually are representing, we have somebody on. Who is? Devin. Okay, so we have one.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have somebody. I was just all of a sudden kind of looking around the table going, who is our representative? Are we, because if we're representing that, we have to be at that same table. And have something similar.
What did he say?
I can just read what Devin said. Devin said, I'd be happy to represent probation employees and work with Aaron on MSRS. I would also suggest separating MSRS and para, given the conversation so far. Almost entirely focused on counties.
Muddy this up even more, but the question of what these subgroups are meeting up, it's in my mind, I'm betting one of two things. Is it for the employee groups to come up with their ideal contribution rate, or is it to define what we're going to ask para to ask for an MSRS for the actuary kind of reassessment? If it's the first, it's not our place as employers either. That's you all. If it's the second, I am very acutely interested in making sure we're asking all the questions so that we can continue going through the menu of options together. I also am comfortable asking Doug, from employer perspective, on para in general, I'm also comfortable knowing Doug and Amy saying, get us as much, where you're one shot at the apple more, get us as much and as many variables as you can to get the best picture with the limited resources you have. So that's something we want to set as a group. We could do that independently of these subgroups meeting.
Clarifying question, do we have to go back to the actuary for initial math? If we don't change the age, can we do that ourselves? I mean, I know I'm trying to, and before we go back to see where it gets us. And then if we have to start playing with the age, that's when we go past the actuary.
Yeah, some of it is simple enough to come back and say, here's what this looks like with different multipliers. Here's what it looks like with different COLAs, post-retirement COLAs. That we can do without going to the actuary. Where the actuary is needed is a change in the different retirement age. That's what's critical.
That would be my suggestion, that we do that first. Get a table to see where bringing down the multiplier and the cost of living, if we can get closer to the contribution rate of the day.
That was gonna be my exact point, that I think it would be easier if we had all that information. And then if there's subcommittees, we still need them, that would be easier for those subcommittees to do their work. If there were more scenarios on the table. Because it may answer our questions and make us all more comfortable with coming up with some sort of a recommendation.
Amy Jo?
It may also help us come up with more questions to ask in the next actuarial assessment, give us more time. If we work through this a little bit, because that again is my concern. I think we need to work together to come up with more questions before we go back to our one shot at the actuarial assessment.
I'm comfortable with your direction. I just think eventually we're gonna have to ask that question, as uncomfortable as it might be. And even if you say still not worth it, and we wanna pay more, differently to have 60. If this is our effort to outline that plan, we're thinking about the new members who start 5 years from now, the younger actives, the middle actives, and those closest to retirement. We should get all that information possible. So I'm fine with how you propose we start with the hope that if we have, as we continue these conversations, we still put that out there.
MSRS and P area, if you're comfortable with this approach and you think you can provide the information that will help groups make informed, maybe build consensus around some different scenarios.
Well, we can based on the para study that was done for para members. And I would say, like what Aaron said earlier, is that the numbers for MSRs would be a little different because they have some different demographics, but I still think whatever we're showing for para would be helpful to the MSR's case.
The GRS, they have the breakdown of costs, break it down.
They don't, but we can.
I just put a request into our actuary to get a quote to see how much it would do. Just do premise rest folks for the same thing as. So we can do our own analysis. It might take.
Sarah want help with this? Do I get a special calculator? I don't know how you do that. If you don't need help, that's fine. If you want help.
And I'm gonna ask, staff to just kind of distill what we think is happening.
I think we'll ask Doug and Amy Para to go back and run numbers for a new plan, not touching the normal retirement age. My question to you perhaps is, do you need this work group to give you different parameters, or are you guys okay just running a bunch of different scenarios based on the information you have? And before I let you answer that, once we get those numbers, that's when perhaps the sport group will come back together and say, okay, let's split off into smaller groups and come up with questions, but we'll wait until we get those numbers at our next meeting, which will be in October.
I'm clear with the direction, what we need to give our actuary. I don't know how much time it would take for that change in retirement age study. I don't control that.
But as far as just doing the other multiplier.
The multiplier, all that,
ones,
that's,
October.
yeah, we can do.
Go ahead, Dave.
Just a clarification on the post-retirement increases. Are we satisfied with the actuarial study had the 1% to 1.5%? Or are we asking for alternatives to that?
The study was, the para study was based on the para correctional formula, which is 100% of CPI capped at 2.5. So that's what the study was based on. And what we can easily do is show cost impact of having a different quota formula like what the general plan currently is. That's not a hard thing to do.
So I would like to see
So that can be put on the menu options. Thanks.
But in the vesting piece, is that also something that's useful to look at? It's not, doesn't provide too much difference.
Yeah, vesting really, and I can ask our actuary about this too, but vesting tends to be a really minimal, very minimal.
Confirmation question for you, Doug. If we come back on October 2nd, after we get the numbers from you and say, okay, we do want to look at, or worker wants to look at a different normal retirement age. What you're saying is we don't know how long that might take the actuary. It probably wouldn't be the next meeting. It might take a while.
I'll ask them, I'll put them on notice that the request is coming. I'll say it's PARA's top priority. And they have all this stuff queued up, so they're not starting from scratch. So I suspect that they'd be able to turn around by that next meeting.
Yeah, and then I'd like to start working on the next question, because we're about halfway through.
No, and I think it'll be good discussion because we'll have a menu of the things that we're considering. Hopefully we can create a hierarchy, especially for employees. I want to hear which one's the most important. The retirement, the COLA next, the multiplier next, which of those is the most important. And then hopefully we'll get a sense from Doug and Amy of that same menu, what gives us the most purchasing power down? What are the big pieces? Because we might be resting our hopes on something that we're like, this will give us going from 2.2 to 2.0. That should save us a couple percent and we only see 0.5 or vice versa. So I think those will be helpful exercises.
Well, and just to, I just want to clarify this because it hasn't been talked about at all at this point. The JIRA study did include disability using police and fire provisions that added 5% over and above what we're talking about. So I'm kind of concluding that that's, that could be shown on the menu too, but I'm just saying like that's over and above what we're already talking about.
I feel a consensus when we get to that one, that question.
So, and then the other thing is the past service. So all I'm really confirming right now is that we're not considering going to the actuary and asking for any further report related to police and fire disability or past service.
Any final thoughts from anyone online? Well, then let's move to the second question on the list, which is how much are employers willing to pay, what percentage? And I would.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of talked about this a little bit already. Last discussion. I mean, I would people have more follow up. At the same time, for potential applications right now. But if we wanted to talk, I mean, I go back to our members if we're talking about the 7 members of CSM.
Owen Worth, League, Minnesota Cities. I just wanted to echo the comments that Matt made on this. We originally thought, right, that cities are facing budgetary constraints with the federal legislation that's been passed and having property tax base, and just want to echo there that cities are similarly on the era general plan kind of parameters. So just wanted to get that out there too.
Employer side. Anyone online want to chime in on this one?
No, I mean, and I don't want to be a broken record here, right? I mean, a $50 million cut just this year, we are facing additional cuts next year, right? Any change in the employer contribution is prohibitive and will cut into our programming and will lead to additional staffing cuts. So any places are a problem for us, unfortunately. That's just where we are. That is the reality. That will not change. It's going to continue to have additional cuts for the next 4 years for us until our facility is closed in Stillwater 2029. At some point past that, perhaps we will have increased funding, but I think you guys, right, you understand the impacts to my agency are, we are with the cuts at present anyway. I do think that other agencies will soon be feeling our pain, so public safety may not be in our place now, but maybe in the future that will be the reality, and it's unfortunate.
I think for DPS, I mean, our budget is holding pretty steady right now. With the federal landscape being so uncertain in areas related to like emergency management, Office of Justice programs and that kind of thing, like we don't have, like so many, right? We don't know, and federal priorities are shifting constantly, and so we can't say for sure. Today right now looks like we'll be steady, and
I don't want to commit to, we can do this. I think that it's not as hard of a probably not or no, maybe as corrections. We're just not in your position. That's not to say that we could be in the future, right? I mean, state funding is really difficult. We don't have property tax levies and things like that. So, the sources of revenue and income for state, most of the agency comes from the general fund, and that's tough.
You would like to point out that the state does collect property tax and commercial and recreational properties.
But likely was 97% of our budget is straight from the budget. So it's, we don't generate revenue. We don't have other resources that we can tap in this space. So it likely will mean cuts and staff cuts and program cuts.
Any other thoughts, comments on that one? So it sounds like there may be a little more discussion to have around this issue, but that one might be answerable at this point for the most part. Right. Kind of segueing then into what is the expectation on the part of employees from employers?
Guess I could go. Is that?
Go ahead.
I had to read it again. Wait, I thought we answered that one. I think for us is we want employers to recognize that the work that we do is, as Tammy Jo said, in between law enforcement and jail, prison. And that on the probation side, I don't want to speak for you, and that we have groups of people that are aging, getting to an age that we haven't seen because of Rule of 90. So we are in a different area now where we are going to have people who are older, who are going to be doing stressful jobs that they haven't done. A lot of them had retired with Rule of 90. And also recognize that there is a cost savings to the counties of getting the high earners off your salary. There's a benefit for that, and there's a benefit for getting those older people off of insurance and being able to bring in more young people as well, which is helpful. And just to not close the door on a percentage increase if that's something that we can figure out how to get to. Did I cover it?
Madam Chair, I would echo what Nicole said. I think we want parity in between those two groups. I mean, we don't want to be the general fund or the coordinated funds, the average clerical office type of worker. We want parity somewhere between corrections. Sure, go ahead then.
Any other employee groups are online?
I want to check on this one on the employee side. Go ahead, Matt.
Just taking notes, thank you. And I think ours are that we want the plan to be structurally sound and funded, which again, I think we're all committed to, that the contribution rates, regardless of the menu that we pick, are reasonable and not too much of a burden, particularly for those starting out or with families or other costs outside of what we might all bring to the table today. Statutory language, I think, for not only your roles, that I've heard Nicole's educated me on not public safety adjacent continuum is the word that I hear. And I respect that. And so I think it merits, just like correction, to have something that's very clear on why these groups are getting this, why you're different than child protection, who is also in the field or in homes. or other tough occupations. And then intergenerational equity, which I know that term keeps getting brought up, and that we're continuing to just discuss, but that we're just being mindful of that as well.
I'd like to add one more thing. I think, we also have to go into this with the knowledge that the employers and the employees are getting hit with another mandatory fee with the Minnesota Personal Leave Act starting in 2026. And so that's something that we can't ignore, and something that we're going to have to include in our education as this goes out. Because so I hear you, I mean, paychecks are very important to the younger, and they have a smaller paycheck and they use all of it to get by. So definitely hear what you're saying.
That I would add here, that is kind of I've heard no one articulate it, but Nicole just said that, getting folks off of insurance. What happens when you retire, so you translate to retiree health insurance, right? And the health insurance, I'm sorry, go ahead. You retire, right? I mean, so that'll be the logical progression of an employee as they retire, then they need retiree health insurance, which is also quite burdensome for, having worked for Washington County, I know what those costs are for retiree health insurance. And, concern about maybe the portability, obviously correctional, the CERT participants get continued health insurance as part of that, which is another burden that's added on above and beyond the pension. And so some concern of the portability or the perception that health insurance would be part of the equation. And so, while it might be good to have, younger employees that are earning less, a retiree certainly does still cost the employer because they remain on a plan, right?
And maybe that's a really good thing to clarify, because I'm not aware of any of our group that actually carries insurance after retirement. And that is one of the things that, I know at some point some of the older groups did, but at this point.
No, but even if it's not part of this, part of the plan, as a retiree, I would anticipate to remain on county health insurance, some sort of COBRA or retirement or some other form or fashion. Not saying that the employer is going to pay it, but they remain on the plan. That's my point, that nothing that's being contributed to. I'm sorry if I'm not making sense.
And there may be differences across different counties, cities, state, et cetera. I think for the most part, most counties have raised contribution. And so if it remains, it's probably pretty strong. And I know at least at the time, retirees were on insurance were rated as a separate group. So that might be the difference between state and county employment.
But they're on the plan. Just kind of my point.
So they're, again, county by county.
Yes,
but
right.
In my old county, they were on a separate.
Sure.
And I would say that actually, in some ways, that for county plans, and again, I don't understand the state plan, and maybe the state has to contribute or has something that they're still on the plan. The majority of county employees, that is a reason they either stay employed to maintain their insurance, or they go to a separate place to work and they don't stay on county insurance, because I would say the COBRA, at least from everybody I'm aware of, is far too expensive for anybody to stay on the COBRA plan with the county. So that most people that I'm aware of would not be remaining on a county plan. But that may be completely different at a state level. I don't know. So.
Karen? I just think for purposes of this discussion, we shouldn't talk about health insurance costs or savings, because we want to stay focused on the pension part.
Yeah, I didn't need to look at the numbers here.
It is, though, that would be a huge benefit for people that if they didn't have it. So I understand why it would be brought up. It's just, it's not. I don't think it's really an option for most.
Still have that they have to be 30-some-year employees that are just retiring that might have still been eligible, but they have been phased out for decades. I can tell you, I've been around for 32 years, and every time I miss those things, like the rule of night, Washington County with the insurance thing, missed it every time. They're gone. But there are some who are retiring at 36 years, 40 years that still had it. And they get to pay the rate the county negotiates. And so it's affordable for them instead of going on state plan or something like that, if they retired before Medicare.
Sorry, one more insurance comment. And just so everyone's aware as well that I was a state employee. They had great insurance. I loved it. It almost kept me there when I was a state employee. County insurance has got to be expensive. It's not a great deal anymore. That's one of the hard parts, is that used to be one of the primary reasons for being a government employee. I was a single mom. I needed great insurance for my kid. And so that's why I did that. Now, if I step back off of county insurance and look at go on the healthcare exchange, because it'll be based on my retirement income instead of my current income, it's actually the same cost or less than county insurance is. So that's the difference in the world we're at now, is that insurance, you're right, shouldn't be a part of this conversation, because we don't know what people would choose to do. And it's not really going to inhibit people from going as much as it used to be before the healthcare exchange. Or if that goes away.
Unless they're self-pay. Yeah. Self-pay. So our person's very way cheap.
Final comments on that? Anyone online want to weigh in on this discussion?
Great, and I would just say that, as an employer, like Matt said, I agree with him 100%. I would say that the why is particularly interesting and important. And so be interested in having that really clear, delineated.
Well, let's move ahead on then from the employer-employee expectations of one another to the question about what do we hope the legislature will do?
That's whatever we say.
I second that.
We're a lot of money. You want to start? Is your pen raised for a reason then?
No.
I seem to be
I
the
think
starter.
maybe part of the question is, if not what was brought last time, what?
Right.
The bill that was before them didn't pass. So if that's not a realistic bill, then what might be?
I think it's more realistic than. I got the sense that even for the last 2 weeks, this is a testament. It didn't just start with probation. The arguments deserve a lot of credit for bringing these issues up years ago. But I got the sense that there was definitely interest in the conversations of the plan, but it is a lot to get a standing plan up in one session with a lot of logistic questions and plans themselves saying what are the specifics. The intergenerational equity was a little bit of an obstacle last minute, but I don't think it was the hesitancy of that if the plan made sense that we weren't going to potentially vote on it. But I think this question of what do we expect from the legislature, I just hope that there's context that it's not happening in a vacuum. We had to have an uncomfortable conversation with folks that are also doing hard jobs, forensic scientists. There were other groups attached to your study at one point or another, other different types of county employees. And I think there's the potential for other public groups to become meaningful in these conversations. So I do think that I'm hopeful from an employer perspective that the legislature considers both what we give back, hopefully a consolidated viewpoint, but also how they're going to make it so clear why they're doing the historic thing that they're doing and why this is.
I would agree with you, Matt. I think it's very important that whatever legislative language comes out is very clear, so that there aren't all the ifs, ands, then why, but it's all the good things. And I would also like to see everything you said on the menu, as well as, language for past service. And, and understanding that the intergenerational equity, see, that will always get me. But making sure that that also isn't hitting the people at the other end of the spectrum as well. Because that's also a concern for our group and our members is, great, you come up with a plan, but if no one at the end can take it, then we haven't solved anything.
Jim,
Yeah, we were using term as the intergenerational equity piece was coming up. There was a lot of concern about the intergenerational equity of opportunity. The opportunity, so there's, I mean, we get, there's the financial piece, but there's also that that Derek kind of mentioned, you know, the rule of 90 people got it, and then all of a sudden you've got this whole group of people that are putting on bulletproof vests and heading out, you know, in the 60s and stuff. And then even just now, as we head into, you know, we talk about some of those same Department of Corrections clients, stuff that are now going to be released out to our care, our work, you know, with the changing in legislation. So, and yeah, just that intergenerational equity piece of opportunity. If we can get something figured out there, one way or another, it's, you know, it seems pretty tough.
oh, Jim Mortensen. Go ahead.
I think the legislature's given us our marching orders with this committee. Where this can has been kicked down the road, way too many years. And it's our job to get to common ground where we can bring something back to them, where they're not gonna have people testifying in opposition of it. And I get the feeling that if we can bring them back a product that everybody can live with, it'll get passed this year.
Thank you, Jim. Owen?
Yeah, and I'm sure this is something everybody in this room is aware of, but this isn't a hope for the legislature. This is more just a general expectation for the legislature of, we know that coming down the pike is a budget deficit. And just, I think my expectation for the legislature is anything, you know, in tension, you're competing with so many other groups. And so this coming together with a plan, you know, I haven't been tracking this when they start new pension plans, either in MSRs or FARA. Anything that's dependent on work group coming to consensus on something that's dependent on a state appropriation might not be a good expectation of the legislature, knowing that the budgetary constraints are getting worse as
Anyone else? So what happens then if the legislature is unable to provide funding? That one just touched on that. Are we willing to, you know, have a scaled back proposal or some ideas maybe that would be able to press ahead if we didn't get a big state appropriation? David?
I'm understanding this correctly, but the plan, should we get agreement on the plan? That plan would be balanced in the sense that contributions and earnings would pay for benefits. And so our goal should be to design a plan that doesn't require an appropriation. If we do that, but it excludes an important component, such as past service or whatever, then that might be framed up as a separate piece. I think if we create a plan that requires funding from the legislature to meet the normal cost, we probably not done our job.
Go ahead, Joe.
I would agree with David completely in terms of the fact that I think our primary focus really needs to be really getting this plan forward, especially not just for, as we talk, and I want to make it that we are not forgetting the intergenerational inequities that we were talking about for people like us sitting at this table. But I also don't want to leave behind our young probation officers, that I don't want them sitting at this table in 20 years. I want to make sure that we have a plan going forward one way or another that will bring new probation officers into the field or dispatchers or whatever. And that means making a plan that's going to work going forward. And then what we can't figure out is what we go to the legislature and ask for. And that's probably the past service credit or something like, there's a piece that isn't going to be a long-term ask. It's going to be those one-time dollars.
I agree, but let's figure out a plan now that does not require money from the legislature. Not that we're not gonna ask for it for any, for something, but I think if we have our ducks in a row, it'll be better. But again, not that we're not gonna ask for some funding, but
We're on the same page on that. That's the first item. And certainly, while we're wrapping this up, if people have questions that should be added to this list, let us know and we can either start working on those today or we can put them on a new list. I think this is really helpful to frame our collective understanding of what we need to do and where maybe some of the pitfalls are going to be. So the last question then is, what conditions exist on the contributions? Does it mean, anyone want to start just kind of a employer or employee position on that?
Madam Chair. Not sure if this is the appropriate time to bring it up, but one of the things that I saw from the actuarial presentation and just the comments that Doug made earlier, one of the things that kind of jumps out to me when we had that presentation was the difference in the contribution rate between the police and fire disability benefits and or in general disability benefits. So that's just one that I think is really a massive decision for this work group as it's putting together originally.
Anyone online have thoughts on this one? Do you have any, you helped us draft these questions, and I'm just wondering if there were some sub questions within this one that you think would be helpful for the group to discuss as we proceed.
I think revisiting this question when the menu is available to people about different options, because I think then it might be a little easier to think about priorities when you see the price attached to it.
Chair, I wonder, can we answer the question Owen just brought up? I mean, this disability question? Can we come to consensus today? Are we going after the one where you can't do this job versus any job? Which one are we going after? I personally am not thinking we can fund the extra 5% that we live in, the disability that we have today. That is my
I guess we haven't discussed it directly, but just sitting here, we're all nodding. We've been living in that plan. It's, I don't know. Tanya, how do you feel about that?
One else. Oh, there's one online.
Evan, is Maven that the same or Jim Mortensen?
Devin. Oh, no, never mind, sorry. Don't think we have anyone online asking to speak on. Oh, we start getting that.
Just wanted to make sure that we got state groups too.
Yeah,
So if Devin has an opinion or Jim, because Jim was involved in the duty disability conversation.
right.
Rarely in the list, so I want to make sure they have a chance.
Like to know, Jim, if I misspoke.
No, you didn't miss it all. It's, that's a whole nother topic though, on all this for the duty disability stuff.
One will want clear, I think that's from an employer perspective, there is so much that I saw Doug shaking his head yes, when Owen was saying that was a big difference in percentage. I appreciate everyone uniformly saying yes, it absolutely is, but we'll want to make sure that this isn't a, well, no for now and yes later, like that. We'll want to be clear as a group that no benefits that we're achieving are this and that we're universal on that. Yes.
So I think the study that GRS did, it was using what was police and fire. And then the general plan is that, right? And then, but paracorrectional is also different from those. And we don't know what a cost would look like for if we call it's more similar to paracorrectional. And to get those numbers, is that an actuary question or is that a cost menu that Doug calculates question?
The correctional plan, from my recollection, people don't ask a lot of questions. Is it's a duty disability, it is an occupational disability. I believe that the correctional plan does not have to confirm. At least for here, I don't know if it's and then it is about 15 years of your benefit, and it has a regular disability. So it's a duty occupational and a regular occupational disability. So it's a smaller scale than
Still a presumption.
no presumption. Yeah, it's presumption. The worker comp presumptions do not apply to PRS.
Anyway, I don't know for the work group, if those are numbers that would be helpful to you or basically. But it is for the general, if it's gonna make it more than this 19.8%, 19.08%. We don't need to try to figure out those numbers, or could it all be a possibility to try to come to a middle ground? Such that we need to be looking at more numbers is sort of where I'm trying to ask you all. Do we need anything more there? Everybody's pretty set that we think it's going to be general and we don't need to try to figure out more numbers.
Having a lower benefits, not today, eventually, or the next meeting, this one, so that we can put it aside.
If the group is comfortable doing that, that's fine with me. I'd like to kind of chat with Scott about whether we want to start voting on issues or if there are enough people nodding around the room and no one's saying no, that we agree anything that we deliberately don't address in this, that we put that in the list in the report so that the legislature knows that we as a group were deliberate about that. We didn't just ignore it.
Good point on the vote too. I think you're absolutely right. We don't want to go about every single issue.
Yeah, and I mean, if we get to that, we can certainly agree as a group that we want to start voting on things, but I feel like it's going pretty well without that.
Agreed.
So,
And Devin did comment, he said the disability conversation is a very small piece.
okay. Okay, well, are there any other questions that we should have on this list under number 1 on the agenda? And we can, this isn't the last say, on any of this, but if we miss any discussions that would be helpful to have before we start proceeding. Okay, and with that, are you comfortable moving to number 2? Okay. So The second item then is the new plan feature, and we talked about trying to come up with some definitions of probation officer and 911 telecommunicator. And staff has assembled some ideas around this, and so if it's okay with you, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can walk us through kind of how you're approaching this part of it.
Yeah, so at our last meeting, we sort of went through my memo and kind of the options there. Sort of appreciated the comments that everybody gave, but we sort of ended that all the group should go back and sort of come up with definitions. So then I did ask the group for definitions to be sent to me today by 11. And I have included them here if I received them. And so we did get definitions from Darn for group on the telecommunicators, and then also from Matt and Owen on telecommunicators and probation officers. So there's printed copies. Also, if you go to the agenda online, on your computer, opening it up to the group at this point to hear their comments, but I think also in speaking with Amy, I think Para and maybe ultimately MSRS have certain things that will need to be included just on like the administration side. And those are the items to consider are full-time, part-time employees. Should they be included? Should they not? You know, if they go from one to the other, how does that get covered? Another question is sort of supervisory positions. We talked about that last time. Again, that will need to be defined. And then also, we had talked about this maybe as of like percentage last time, but if somebody performs duties under one of these definitions, but it's only 30% of their time, what happens to that? And maybe that's not even an issue in these worlds, but sort of those three sort of questions, I think will also need to be answered when we're looking at definitions. But I'm happy to sort of just start with kind of the first definition that we have up here, which I think came from Darn Jim with help from Para, and just kind of hear your perspectives on what you were thinking about when you drafted it. You know, what was your reasoning? And then if people have questions or more thought that we need to add in, we can do that.
So, yes, with a lot of help from Amy, Jim and I spoke on this last Friday, and I got a lot of clarity in that, you know, the definition that I brought forward was from the 403 chapter, you know, defining public safety telecommunicator in the 911 chapter. So it's an indication that it has to be defined though in the pension chapter. And that's what we're looking at here. So it kind of does bring over the definition that we hope will at some point and has been vetted in the past to go to the 403 chapter. Because today it is called 911 telecommunicator. That's why this working says that instead of public safety telecommunicator. But at the national level, the term public safety telecommunicator, the title, that is the title that is goal and hope to be certified at the federal level to move from administrative to protective services. And I don't know if anybody saw last week, the Senate, US Senate actually did pass that bill. So now we're looking for the House side to do it, and then maybe it can actually get signed. And this is the first time in all the years that it's been a bill that it ever came out of committee, let alone got voted on. So the progress there is very heartening to me. I have never been more optimistic that we might actually see this get done. And it just shows that we're doing good work here in Minnesota. So to recognize them even ahead of that reclassification with an enhanced pension. So with this definition, it still fits, but we need those parameters that you guys discussed. You know, they have to be certified by the employer. There are some PSAPs that have part-time employees. So, you know, if we want to do that 50% of the time, I don't think it's many, but metro-wide, you know, bigger 911 centers versus greater Minnesota can differ a great deal. And of course, in greater Minnesota, some of the telecommunicators are actually corrections officers as well. And then they're in the correction pension already. So there's differences there. It is rare to have a public safety telecommunicator detailed to another position, but it can happen. And Jim and I talked about that. We don't know how many there are out there, but I know just myself at Washington County, we have one public safety telecommunicator who is off on a detail as an analyst for HIDA, so federally funded drug task force. So that person would technically be uncertified during those years, is the way I read this language, and I'm fine with it. And because that's how I know you guys said you do corrections, they're, you know, now they're doing 75% contact this year, or 2 years they're not, and they get their credits moved between the pension funds. So I think Amy educated us well and helped us get to what's in front of us here for the pension definition of public safety telecommunicator. And yeah, I.
Go ahead. Dara probably knows this. We have a little sneaky situation. I'm a former transit employee where those public safety telecommunicators are also bus dispatchers or actually bus supervisors. So they do both, right? Like one day they might be assigned to be a bus supervisor and dispatch buses, and the next day they might be dispatching police. So it's a really weird scenario. So that, I don't know if we could, might be a transit problem for them to fix in terms of how they classify their jobs, but it's just something to throw out there. It's weird as that.
And those are the nuances that, you know, I'm not that familiar with how transit does it. But I think that's where too, the bus job doesn't fit.
Right, exactly.
So it should be only the certification of when they're doing the public safety side.
So then is there like, you know, to the point, is there
50%.
Right. I don't know if that's the case, or maybe those employees would have to make that choice. I can't say enough about gender control. All of the either. So it's a weird place for them. It's a kind of fun, because not that many.
It is true. So, and I don't think, and that's an MSRS, you know, so that would be, you know, the definition for them to, I don't know if they want to call out Metro Transit, because the folks at the state level that you're covering would be Metro Transit, the University of Minnesota, and State Patrol.
Okay, Aaron, and then we're going to Jim Mortensen online. Go ahead, Aaron.
So the University of Minnesota decides who's gonna participate and who's not in which programs. So the Board of Regents make that determination, so we wouldn't want to include that in the definition. Metro Transit, I need more information because they also kind of get to decide, but I think there is a general plan. So I probably have to contact them for information, because I was only planning to include the radio communications officers and radio communication supervisor classification of those.
And so way at the beginning, I can let Jim answer too, but when we said our position, our stakeholders, you know, we did want to include, I think Metro Transit is fair, their secondary PSAP.
Not wrong. 403 is such a whole for transit, which is another add to the 403 list.
Yeah, the 403 hasn't been touched in a long, long time. We keep trying and keep getting denied by the lobbyists for, yes, the telephones and stuff, but it's on the list.
It's on the list.
Yeah, to clarify. So you're right. I mean, so Metro Transit is an issue here. And I don't know how that comes out, but that's why we wanted to make sure it was discussed, and we have to deal with it. That's appreciate that.
Jim?
Yeah, Met Transit has its own police department. So does the airport. So does the U of M. They've all got their own dispatch centers. And that would fall into the secondary PSAPs. And so these folks would need to be included in this.
Airport's a primary.
Was it a primary? I was thinking it was a secondary.
It's a primary.
Primary transit is just the only gap in statutes, just due to when they were developed, statute language.
But transit has its own separate police department that gets dispatched to police calls for service. They make arrests, they're their own separate police department.
And their police departments in Piana. So,
Right, yeah, so they've got all the benefits of being a full police department. It's just the dispatcher, telecommunicator, transit supervisor is what they're called. It's a weird animal.
Yeah, Metro Transit came along 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they became secondary. I don't know, time flies.
I think longer than that, but regardless, yeah. It just doesn't meet the statutory definition of a secondary.
If we ever have calls routed to them, and I don't know when that would possibly change, but then that would make them a primary, but they are not today.
Those folks at the Capitol, would that, this definition include those? So right now, there's no. The Capitol dispatch is not a dispatch center. They've got security that are not RCOs. So it's this really weird space. I think they're gonna change that model. I have no idea when, how, where. I'm not privy to those conversations. So that could develop and change a little bit in terms of Capitol security, but right now the RCOs I think are primarily at Rochester and Roseville.
So this definition probably doesn't work from the rest of our perspective, just because we're not the same. But I'll work with Devin and Paula. On the other. Just to kind of come at it from the MSRS perspective, because we have our own separate chapters. These were.
It's a PSAP and then police, yeah.
So the police are in PNF, the employees are in MSRS.
Yeah.
Owen, did you want to talk about?
Yeah. So yeah, we submitted the bullet headline public safety telecommunicator definition. And as was alluded to earlier, this was, we had been workshopping this internally and we kind of took the definition from 4.3 and repurposed it for the purposes of pension group. So it mimics that language largely, but just minor adjustments to it, including the directed supervisors as a definition of public employee as an apparent statute. Primary responsibility or directly supervises those who are responsible is or telephone call. We just thought this captured enough people and was narrow enough without being too broad. I know that Kara didn't like the phrasing directly. Or with it primary, that's what it was, yeah. So we certainly are open to conversations on this, but this was just something that we were working internally that we thought could be food for thought or that welcome any feedback or questions.
Percentage thresholds.
Yeah, and if I could speak to that, Ann and Scott and I had to work on the PNF definition. We used primary in it, and it really got difficult for us to figure out some of these positions. So we would prefer a number. That's why the PNF statute has that no less than 50% time, and that seems to have worked well. Ultimately, sure everyone should be in the PNF plan. We're open to discussion here. I just know that I would prefer to not have that issue arising.
Bring that back to my initial thought reading once we had together, I appreciate the context was, I also thought like primary is nebulous, but then it hits the employer, not Kara certified.
Yeah,
That no longer is a problem.
we can have more conversations about that. I know we got put in spots, PNF definition got ironed out.
Okay. And just to say too, I wasn't ignoring what you were
Yes.
saying earlier. I was going along with that. Certified.
Yeah, and maybe that is a different dynamic. I have to, let me think on that.
Okay, talk this. And then, yeah, I didn't include it in the definition that's here, but the employer certification is something that needs support as well. Just in my quick review of the P and F statute, I didn't see the definition of some of those positions. I thought it was kind of later in statute, so we thought it would fit in statute, but just didn't know it needed to be in this definition.
Again, sorry, I wasn't tracking.
I just didn't want to include the employer certification piece in the definition. That could be in that chapter.
Yeah, so what, if you look at the correctional plan has the language of the certification. So it says like, kind of like how ours looks a little bit is how the correctional plan language works. And that's what I would envision for this, whenever we figure out the definition.
Other thoughts about the public safety telecommunicator definition?
Or what are your thoughts on this compared to what you created with?
So, yeah, owing to what's in the 403 today, we're trying to make the 403 that. I mean, again, what you just said, the 403 can eventually have this. I don't, as long as we have a definition that meets the needs for the pension, I'm not going to get picky that it has to match perfectly. But that said, it does get annoying when you look through state statute, and in this chapter, we're called dispatchers. In this chapter, we're called telecommunicators. This one, we're called call takers. And in this one, it would be nice if you could match to have consistency. So I'm good either way, just we need to get into the goal and have no issue with the certification or the 50%. Is that something staff could sort of mesh for future review?
Yeah, so I can take, basically look at what you've done and see if there's anything that's completely different with this language in here that should change, but otherwise I can just come back with one definition for you all to go through. And then you tell me yes or no.
And like I say, the one online is the definition we're trying to put in 403. Yep. And in 2022, if they would assign the omnibus bill, it would already be in there.
And that's really helpful context for me, so I appreciate it.
All right, so I think what I'd like to do, because I do need to finish by 3 and I don't want to bite off another big chunk of discussion, but maybe Alina, you could just tell us where we are with the probation officer definition draft. And then it sounds like there may need to be a little more information on that one from some other groups before we can have a robust discussion. So it feels to me like a good place to stop. And then we can talk about the agenda for next time, which is October 2nd. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we have one probation officer definition that I got from Matt today. That was essentially what I sent around in my memo. We didn't get to hear from the probation officer side of things. So I think that's exactly right. Let's table this for next time. I'll do it as a first agenda item. I'll bring you a definition for telecommunicators, and then we'll also come with a definition of whatever probation officers in whoever you want to talk with, whether it's PARA or MSRS. You can review that definition in advance of October 2nd. And then Aaron, do you want to also send me anything for telecommunicators for MSRS? Is that okay for the next time also?
Yes.
Okay. So
We would have a corrections agent, it's actually our correct title, so I guess that would be flushed out. Correct. Yeah, and you've got the definitions for that.
Compare separately, and then Devin will loop Devin.
So then all that said, thank you for all the hard work today. It doesn't feel like we crushed this agenda, but I think we got through some really good discussions. And it will help us as we proceed through some of the things that we need to do in order to meet the requirements. And so I would suggest we start off next time with the definition of probation officer and then move into Doug's numbers. Yeah, actually, we did numbers first. Maybe we should do that. I think we should, since that's kind of where we left off. Yeah, we have some unfinished business from that number 1. So let's start with that. And then we'll get back on track with where we were when we stopped today. So if there are no objections to that, we will see you on October 2nd, same place at 1 o'clock, and I believe Co-Chair Badness will be sharing. with you. Thanks again for the hard work today.